Hi friends, welcome to EduTalk series of Amigos IAS Academy. Today we have with us Govind sir to discuss in detail about India's trade strategy in multipolar world. Hi sir, welcome to the program.
Yeah. Good evening, Hari.
Good evening sir. So before we get into the discussion, let me brief you about the trade fact. So in 2024, the global trade in goods and services, it was around 33 trillion US dollars. And the global trade in goods, it is around 25 trillion US dollars. Around 75% of the international trade, it is happening in goods. 8 trillion US dollars, this is the trade in global trade in services, which accounts for 25%. And if you see where India stands in international trade in goods and services, in the last 2 decades, between 2005 and 2024, India's share in the mercantile trade increased from 1 to 1.8%. When it comes to India's share in the services global trade, we have improved from 2 to 4.3%. In mercantile exports at the global level, India's rank was 18. In services exports, India's rank was 7. And if you see the 4 largest trading partners with India, we have United States of America, European Union, China and United Arab Emirates. If you take United States of America, the bilateral trade between India and United States of America, both in goods and services, it's around 210 billion US dollars. If you take the bilateral trade between India and European Union, both in goods and services, it's around 220 billion US dollars. Then China, with China, India's bilateral trade, both in goods and services, it is close to 150 billion US dollars. And in the 4th position, we have United Arab Emirates, with which we have trade in goods and services amounting to 110 billion US dollars. So this is the brief data about international trade in goods and services. So let's get started with the discussion on India's trade strategy in multipolar world. And let us ask sir several questions covering this topic in a comprehensive manner. Sir, good evening. The first question
good
for
evening,
you.
Hari, and good evening, students.
Sir, there is now in today's world, in today's uncertain world, there is growing protectionism. We are witnessing geopolitical tensions.
Yes.
We are also witnessing supply chain disruptions, decline of multilateral trade and decline of WTO. And we also have witnessed trade wars, tariff wars, and also currency wars. So what is the possible impact of all such developments on India's long-term economic growth and also job creation?
Yes, students. Now, if you look at today's scenario, basically we are living in a world which is defined by competition, disruption, globalization, and its various trends. Now, there is a specific word which is being termed as called as the VUCA word, which is vulnerability, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So, end of the day, we are living in tough times.
True, sir.
And its impact on India, like what Hari sir had asked, the global environment is very uncertain. The global capital flow is unstable. The global trade imbalance are increasing. The global trade wars, tariff wars, geopolitical tensions, currency wars, and rising trends of deglobalization and protectionism, where nations are insulating themselves from external trade. Now, all this distorts global trade and will have an impact on the global economic growth also, because global trade growth and global economic growth have a direct correlation. Since we are all now living in the age of globalization, where you talk about global economic interdependence or global economic interaction. Now, each nation is dependent on the others for goods and services. There is no nation which can insulate, close its borders, right? Those days of closed economy are almost over. So, more or less all the economies around the world are open economies. The degrees of openness might differ across nations. And since your question is, what is its impact on India? Now, we look at India, right? Like how we've grown as an economy from 1947 till 2026. It's about an 8-year-old journey. And 1951 was our first 5-year plan. And today is 2026. It's exactly 75 years of economic planning. So basically, we have moved from what is called a closed mode of economy, that is where there were large restrictions on imports and exports, investments, and the flow of technologies. And our trade interaction is also limited. Yeah. So from that phase, we have moved to today's world, where we are part of globalization, right? And India is externally integrated, has got external economic interaction with almost more than 120 countries in the world. And we are part of several strategic partnership agreements and several trade agreements, bilateral, trilateral, as well as multilateral agreements. Now, when you come to multilateral trade, right, we are part of what is called the World Trade Organization, which is a genuine multilateral trading body. And we also have signed several regional trading agreements, which are both bilateral and trilateral. Now, when you look at India's growth, 1951, the first 5-year plan, then after a period of 40 years, that's 1991, the next year was the 8th 5-year plan, right, we opened our economy, we adopted the LPG model of economy, which all of us are aware of, liberalization, privatization, globalization. We adopted the market model of economy, right, we adopted the market model of economy when we became an emerging model of economy, right, a more open model of economy. And if you look at one of the ways through which you calculate your GDP, where we say, the production or the income method, the product or the inventory method, then you got your expenditure or the consumption method. India, remember, we are a large consumption-based economy. If you look at India's economic momentum, let's say, growth momentum, which let's say if it is 100%, 60% of our growth momentum is led by domestic consumption, and 40% is led by export growth, export orientation. Now they say it's almost 45, 55, or almost 50% is domestic consumption growth, and another 50% is external economic interaction.
So you mean to
That's
say that
orientation.
we are not an export-led economy?
Not as large as a Germany or a China, but nevertheless, out of every 100 rupees of GDP, you can say growth momentum, 50% is actually led by domestic consumption, another 45 to 50 through export orientation. And one of the ways you calculate your GDP using the consumption or the expenditure method, where we say NI, national income, is equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Right, where C for consumption, I for investment, G for government expenditure, right, C for individual consumption expenditure, I for investment, X minus M is your net foreign inflows, which is your export orientation. So that itself shows that export orientation has become indispensable for India's economic growth. We have several export oriented industries, also known as consumer goods or labor intensive industries, such as textiles, leather, gems and jewelry, refined petroleum products, agriculture products. You export your marine products, right, spices. So we have also now become an export oriented economy. Now, when the global external environment, economic environment is very uncertain, it also has this impact on India, right? And also remember, we are an import dependent economy, and especially in the area of energy. So India remains to be an energy import dependent economy, where even to this day, and China is not far behind, so almost 2/3, more than 70% of our, we actually import. So we are an energy import dependent economy, and our economic growth is energy intensive economic growth. So any kind of external turbulence, especially in the West Asian region, from where we import our energy, right, will have an impact on India, where one of the consequences could be import-induced inflation, right? Which will have an impact on your current account deficit and your trade deficit, and that of course eventually will impact your macroeconomic stability. See, one of the impacts which you asked could be, right, which you notice now, the devaluation of the Indian rupee, right? That is the calculation of the rupee or the exchange of the rupee against the foreign currency, the dollar. Now, rupee devaluation has several negative impacts. It will increase the burden of your external debt repayment, right? It will induce what is called import-led inflation, which will make your energy products costlier. Though the positive impact would be your exports could become costlier and more competitive, but we remain to be more of a domestic consumption economy. So any kind of external impact, right, external turbulence, and its negative impact on the rupee, where your rupee movement gets very volatile, will have an impact on your trade or current account deficit, will have an impact on an external debt. Indian students going abroad, they need to pay more, because for every $1, you need to generate more rupees. So they'll have an impact on your public debt sustainability, external debt, the exchange rate of the rupee, right? It'll have an impact on your capital flows, right? It will have an impact on your foreign exchange reserves, right? Since we are import dependent, right? It will have a lot of negative impact on our import bill, where our import bill turns costlier since, remember, our imports are value laden imports, whereas our exports are more volume driven. So when there is external impact and there is devaluation of the rupee, right, your imports will turn costlier, further widening your trade deficit. Now they say with this impact, India's trade deficit will rise almost to more than $300 billion. And as Hari, which you have said, our impact trade deficit with China itself has touched from almost $60 to $110 billion in these 6 years. That's quite huge. Yeah. So external impact, tariff wars, currency wars, where every nation, to have an unfair trade advantage, right, will go for a pegged exchange rate, right, where they'll try to fix their exchange rate against the dollar, right, so that the movement or volatility is less. Now, if every nation does that, right, it is called competitive devaluation of currencies, which will impact global trade, which will impact the position of foreign exchange reserves, that can dampen trade relations. The global economic and monetary coordination gets impacted, and in turn, the credibility of institutions like IMF, which is said to be responsible for global monetary coordination, managing the currencies, even that will get impacted. Yeah, so we are in for tough times, but India has always been to be a very resilient nation. So probably it's a matter of time, but we'll have to tide the crisis, and the impacts could be short term, medium term, as well as long term.
So then why in the last 1 decade we are moving in the direction of deglobalization?
Yes.
So why there was a decline in multilateral trade? Why there was an increase in bilateral and regional trade agreements?
Sure. Hari, I'll just go a bit, I'll just go travel back, right? Yeah. See, we achieved independence in 1947. 1948, the first global regulatory body for trade called GATT was started, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. So 1948, 47, we gained independence. You know, we are the primary signatory bodies of any international organization. That's the kind of respect we have towards a rule-based global order. So we became part of GATT, and of course it was trade only in goods. So we became part of GATT, right? So the journey began. India's, then we adopted the import substitution strategy. The journey was going on. Then 1964, the UNCTAD was established, United Nations Council on Trade and Development, which had more the participation of developing economies, like India and China, right? Yeah, then we moved toward what is called the New International Economic Order, right? Then the generalized system of trade preferences. The trade preferences given by the developed countries like US for developing countries like India and China, where also we benefited, right? And coming to the 1980s, right, we came upon we gave what is called GSTP, the generalized system of trade preferences, concessions given by the developing countries to the LDCs. Since all of us have got only one platform, isn't it? Right? So GATT had a mix of your developed economies at that point of time, developing economies and LDCs. UNCTAD was more of developing economies. Then we had the NIEO, the New International Economic Order, 1975. 1986, the Uruguay round of negotiations began, right? Wherein we felt the time has come to establish a new body to regulate global trade, since we thought GATT had outlived its time and it catered only for goods, whereas the complexity of trade increased. Services became part of global trade. The number of countries participating in global trade increased, right? So 1988 and then 1986, the Uruguay round of trade negotiations, that continued for about 8 years, right? Then 1994, Arthur Dunkel was the chairman of GATT, and the Marrakesh Accord, 1994, which is located in the capital of Morocco, right? The Marrakesh Accord of 1994 eventually led to the Uruguay round of negotiations, 1986-1994, the Marrakesh Accord 1994 December, and then on the 1st of January 1995, right, the WTO was established. Now, why I'm telling you this history is, so we have moved from the pre-globalization era, pre-GATT era, 1948, then we moved towards the globalization era, let's say from 1964, formation of UNCTAD till about 1995 WTO. From 1995 till about 2010, for about 1.5 to 2 decades, we experienced a period of what is called hyper-globalization. right? Where the WTO was established. The number of participating countries increased tremendously. Today we have got about 165 members, right? Yeah. And India and China were great beneficiaries of becoming members of WTO. Right? India became the global outsourcing hub, where our trade in the global services market increased from 0.6% in 1991 to about 3.6%. And now you say it's about 4.2%.
4.3.
Our trade share in global trade also increased. 2008 we had the global economic crisis. From then nations became more, let's say, they started verifying things, right? They became more careful, they became more circumspect. And from 2010 onwards, we started seeing nations moving towards protectionism, right? Which they call as economic nationalism, or protecting their enlightened national self-interest. So the roots of deglobalization actually started slowly penetrating from 2010 onwards, the post-global economic crisis. Then the advent of Donald Trump in 2016, where deglobalization became more of a concern, right? And from 2020 we saw the COVID impact, right? Post-COVID impact, we have now moved towards gated globalization, wherein yes, globalization with trends of deglobalization as well as being very circumspect. Globalization with a lot of controls. So basically, deglobalization is an antithesis to globalization, where the free movement of goods and services, investments, intellectual properties, ideologies, right, gets restricted, gets gated. I mean, just like a gate. So it's nothing but a restriction. So from globalization to hyper-globalization, deglobalization to globalization, globalization to hyper-globalization, hyper-globalization to deglobalization, now gated globalization. So every nation has become circumspect, because with the global economic and trade environment becoming so volatile, right? Nations want to be more inward looking. They want to protect their economy so that they are insulated against external shocks.
Sir, then India was initially very hesitant
Yes.
in entering into trade agreements with the developed countries, but of late it has become more proactive and more confident.
Yes.
And in the recent past, we had several trade agreements with the countries like European Union, United Arab Emirates, New Zealand, Australia.
Yes.
And of late, in the recent past, with the United States of America.
Yes.
Do these agreements help India to become much more resilient and increase and diversify its global trade?
Yes. Yeah. Hari, what we discussed, we say that India has now got about a trading partnership with more than 120 countries in the world, 120 to 130 countries in the world, with about 25 to 30 countries being the major trading partners. Now, of late, I mean, over a period of time from 1991, how we've grown as an economy, right? With the strengthening of India's economic growth story, right? And with strong domestic orientation, also with external orientation, how we've grown as an economy, right? We are part of the World Trade Organization, right? Now, our voice as far as the functioning of the IMF and the World Bank is also increasing. Yeah, our trade network is increasing. And we are also trying, and basically post-COVID, we are also trying to diversify our supply chains. Right? You know, the obvious reason, you want to reduce the dependence on China, right? So the ACRA initiative is the supply chain resilience initiative, right? So diversification of supply chains and building resilient supply chains. Now, in order to do this, you also need to increase your trade network, increase your trade partnerships, and build strong trade partnerships with developed countries. I mean, developed as well as developing countries. So, in this context, if you observe, right, our trade agreements with the global economy, basically the G7 economies, is gaining strength. One, we are more confident because we've developed as a nation. We are now the fourth largest economy in the world. Yet we have also built the diplomatic capital, wherein our power to negotiate and renegotiate has actually increased. Since we also grown as a nation, see, they say for any nation to emerge on the global stage, needs to have four strong pillars: your political strength, economic strength, diplomatic strength, and your military strength, right? And of course, you can talk about your science and technology, the five pillars, right? So since we are strengthening our pillars, we also feel now it is time to expand our trade and economic footprint outreach. So in this context, we are also building our trade partnership, which I mentioned. With USA, the trade agreement with USA has been postponed for a long period of time Now, due to various reasons, you can call COVID and the current context, right? We have signed a free trade agreement with USA, which of course still has got a lot of conditions, strings attached to it. Then the free trade agreement with the United Kingdom, with the European Union, right? Then you talk about Australia, New Zealand, and the UAE, right? So if you're about 6 or 7 major economies in the world, right? We have signed trade agreements and strengthening our trade agreements with other nations. So this is also mutually beneficial to us, since this will increase the scope of our trade markets, both import as well as exports, and will also diversify your import and export markets, which will make you more resilient in the case of any crisis. So your dependence, exclusive dependence on 1 or 2 nations will automatically decline.
Sir, now India boasts about demographic dividend. So it is said that India will have this advantage of demography for the next 2.5 decades.
Yes.
So how can we take advantage of this demographic dividend to leverage increase in the share in the global trade?
Yeah, it's a good question, Hari. I mean, today people talk about what is called demographic economics, and added to it now we also got what is called silver economics, right? So basically, what is demographic economics? Economic attributes, you call it investment, savings, consumption, right? Production associated with the demographic attributes of a population. So demography is study of population. So demographic economics. Now, our advantages, we have got what is called a young demography, right? If you give me some relevant statistics, between 0 to 14 years of age, children, which you call, right? We've got about 36 crores, right? And then 70% of India's population is below 40 years of age, 65% is below 35 years of age, 42% is below 80 years of age, and they say the median age group is about 25 to 50%. So that clearly shows India has got a young demography. And when you have young demography, Hari, the advantages that come from having young demography are quite obvious. One, you'll have very diversified and an active consumption market. See, you talk about Europe, right? Aging demographies. See, what will be the consumption demand of an aging economy, right? When you've got more number of senior citizens, more than 60, right? Probably demand for insurance products, home care services, right? Pension, social security products, probably food products, right? But when you have got a young economy as diverse and as vibrant as India, your consumption market will be wider. That will also, right, increase the width of your production base. You'll be able to attract more investments. Consumption and savings will increase, right? So domestically, you will grow stronger. And also, since you also need to export and import, your trade interaction or external economic interaction will also get strengthened. And when you've got a young demography, their contribution to the economy will be more than what they depend on the economy. An aging demography like EU, they will depend more on the GDP, right? And contribute less. Whereas, when you've got a young demography, the contribution component of the GDP is more rather than dependence. So that's India's advantage. But as you've said, Hari, agree, right? This is not a permanent advantage. This is a transitory advantage. So probably till about 2045 or 20 years from now. So the best we can make is in this 20 years, and that's what your Prime Minister keeps on reading, Amrit Kal. So that's when you got a young demography, right? So by 2025, from 2047, 100 years. So everything, I mean, things have fallen in place for India. A young demography, our rising global stature, the world recognizing India as a global guru, our rise as a global guru, right? Global leader. So everything has fallen in place, right? Now the time has come to act strong.
Sir, and again, the Honorable Prime Minister wanted India to be a developed nation by 2047.
Yes, sir.
Which he called it as Vikasit Bharat.
Right.
Then what are the challenges which India faces as of now to increase its trade basket in the international goods and services?
Yes.
So what are the challenges which we have as of now, and how can they be overcome over a period of time?
Sure. Hari, this is a very pertinent question. See, yes, we agree we are a strong domestic-based economy, but we also realize that we are part of globalization. So global economic interdependence is a sine qua non, quintessential. You can't avoid it, you can't insulate it. Yeah. Now, coming to the history of India, Hari, I mean, let's leave the pre-British era. So let's talk about post-1947. Even to this day, India has never been a strong external trading economy. See, we are an extremely strong domestic trading economy where 1/4 of our GDP is actually contributed by domestic trade, domestic supply chains, domestic trade across the states, right? So when you come to the external economy, Hari, I mean, different several reasons, India has always perennially been a trade deficit economy.
True.
Right? So you talk about then trade deficit, or we can call it as current deficit.
Current account deficit.
So we say the current account deficit in India is actually a structural phenomenon. Structural in the sense it is long term and it has been continuing for a long period of time, and you need structural long term solutions to address that. Now, if you talk about India's trade deficit, which we've perennially been, I mean, what are the reasons for it? See, one weakness in manufacturing, we've never been a strong manufacturing economy. Labor market issues we have, which is a major reason. The trade infrastructure is weak, in the sense the export and import infrastructure. That's because your infrastructure, physical infrastructure, right, road, rail, airport, water connectivity is not very strong. So now you talk about the multimodal infrastructure network, right? Then it's always been that let's say our strategy of negotiation or our strength of negotiation regarding trade deals has not been favorable. I mean, it's like this. Suppose you talk about China, Hari, China and Japan. See, we've opened up our markets for them, but we've not succeeded bilaterally, right, in making them open up their services markets for our products, right? So our strength has been negated by the external economies. So that's one, the power of trade. Then as far as exchange rate management is concerned, due to the dependence on the dollar, volatility on either sides, depreciation and appreciation can impact our trade. And now we are doing it, but for a long period of time, till 1991, almost till economic reforms until the early 2000s, our trade basket, our trade markets was very narrow. Right? Probably we only had about 25 to 30 countries, or let's say about at the max 35 to 40 countries. Now we've expanded. So that's another reason. And then you talk about the role of states. See, suppose the state of Andhra Pradesh is very strong in marine exports, Gujarat in energy exports. So every strength, the automobile exports, Tamil Nadu and Maharashtra. But for a long period of time, the state governments have not been taken on board. It's only post-economic reforms, especially the 2015-20 foreign trade policy, and now you're actively involving the states. Now you talk about your export promotion board, including the states, district exports of the latest 2021-26 trade policy. And some of the reasons. Then we had what is called the inverted duty structure problem, which is basically an anomaly in our taxation system, the indirect taxes, where our manufacturing, right, turns costlier or uncompetitive, thus our trade becomes uncompetitive. So your GST has, if not totally, has been able to address that issue to a certain extent, but still a lot of other things need to be corrected. So a host of 8 to 10 reasons, and another, our exports have always been volume driven and less value driven, whereas our imports are more value driven. So all these explain why the current account deficit is a structural phenomenon in India, or why do you have a perennial trade deficit and a high import dependence? Right? Various reasons. Apart from that, we have got a host of other reasons to explain, right, why you have been a trade deficit economy. And now you say, since now we are part of globalization, so what needs to be done now?
Exactly.
So one, Hari, you can strengthen your trade infrastructure. That's your logistics, physical infrastructure, where now we are moving towards multimodal infrastructure connectivity or logistics framework, where you're integrating your road, rail, waterways, ports, and aviation, multimodal, your Pradhan Mantri Gati Shakti Yojana.
PM Gati Shakti
Yojana. Then as far as the exchange rate management is concerned, now we have become more prudent, but now I think the exchange rate is so volatile, it's beyond our control now. Right? And
so
then
labor reforms. What about labor laws?
Yeah, labor sector reforms. Then we have moved toward what is called a more open model of economy, where we have opened up our doors and reduced the restrictions on investments and technologies. And then domestic value addition. Then we have moved towards what is called export incentive growth, the ROTTEP scheme and different schemes, right? The original duty entitlement passbook scheme, right? All these various several schemes too.
Sir, what about the impact of PLI scheme? No.
Yes, yeah. Then post-COVID, we moved toward what is called the productivity linked incentive scheme, wherein initially we identified 14 sectors and now it's been more than 14 sectors, right, which are labor intensive and export intensive, which are actually being encouraged, right, which are being provided incentives, production linked incentive schemes, right. We are now focusing more on the sunrise industries, export oriented industries.
So the economic
and the way we are building our trade partnerships with several nations, right, renegotiating the trade strategies which we signed with China, Japan, renegotiating them, talking to them, building our diplomatic strength, correcting the inverted duty structure. A step towards that is your GST reform, right? Getting the states on board, right? So we are working our way. I think probably it will be a matter of time, right, before we realize our strength. Before we leverage our strength and become much stronger.
So before we conclude, I also want you to throw some light on the recent economic survey presumes that this global uncertainty will extend for another 2-3 decades.
Yes.
So given that context, it spoke about strategic resilience, strategic indispensability as a strategy of India to deal with these uncertainties. Can you briefly explain what they mean?
Yes, probably if you can get this context also which you had earlier mentioned, we are moving towards more of regional trading agreements, right? Yeah. Regional trading agreement, that is trade agreements restricted to a region, which can be bilateral or trilateral in nature. See, the genuine multilateral trading agreement is your WTO, which is slowly becoming dysfunctional due to the trends of deglobalization and then withdrawalism, then lack of coordination as far as global leadership is concerned, right? The decline of global statesmanship and so many reasons. Right? So countries are slowly moving towards bilateral regional trading agreements, which they feel is one of the strategies to build resilience. Since trade is inevitable, so how to become more resilient with multilateral trading system declining, moving towards more of regional trading agreements, bilateral and trilateral in nature. Yeah, that's one. Then, like what you've said, see, they say the transition from Swadeshi to self-reliance to strategic resilience, and strategic resilience to strategic indispensability. The final stage is indispensability, where India becomes indispensable. You can't see, the world needs India more than India needs the world, or else basically it's a mutual relationship, where India will now become part of what is called the rule setting, not just a mere participant. So India's role is going to become indispensable, and the era where India is going to get totally integrated into the regional and the global value chains. So Swadeshi to self-reliance to strategic resilience, where you become stronger and competent, not through protecting yourself, but by building your competencies, increasing your trade reach, right? Diversifying your trade baskets, in the process diversifying your risk also. And the final stage which I said is indispensability, where the world needs India, the world recognizes India as the global leader, as the Vishwaguru, as the connecting link between the global north and the global south.
So that's it about India's trade strategy in a multipolar world. Sir, thank you so much for giving a very enlightened discussion, analysis about this topic. We will come up with yet another episode of Edu Talks in Amigos IAS Academy. So that's it for today. Thank you and all the best.